This is
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod, a podcast from Redhawk Publications.
RedPubPod.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in podcast land. This is RedPubPod. Cue the music. Yay. My name is Robert Knipe, and I'm here with Patricia Thompson and Richard Eller. And our guest today is poet Jay Orlando. And we are talking, say hello to the fans. We are talking about his book called A Tangled Lineage, published by Redhawk Publications. I'm going to let Patty start off our conversation today.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to date all of us in this room, Jay, because back when we were kids, NBC used to have these evening primetime comedies, and sometimes they would say things as dramatic as a very special episode of Blossom, which meant that something was going to happen. A very special episode of Seinfeld. Yeah, we never knew what was going to happen to poor little Blossom. But today's episode... it's one of those things where we've always done poetry. It's our bread and butter. However, this particular poetry book lends itself to a bigger and broader conversation. In light of this being June, Pride Month, Jay, you are a transgender poet. And it's the elephant in the room in that normally we would ask somebody what spurred you to write a book, or is there a personal story behind it? Well, this is your personal story. So this is different. And so as a result, A, thank you. B, it's been a pleasure, and we're very prideful to be able to have published this book. But we do have some additional questions beyond your normal questions we would ask a poet. This book is clearly about your life. It's about your story as transgendered male living in Pennsylvania, specifically the Appalachian region, which again, we've done tons of poetry books and many that are focused on Appalachian. But with your background, it does lend itself to some extra questions, and specifically you as a child. And if you don't mind me being linear, could you tell us a little bit about your coming out journey?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it was kind of a step-by-step thing. I didn't actually know that transgender men existed until I was 17. I came out as a lesbian when I was 15. I was actually outed at my school. I had confided in a friend, and that was very difficult because I come from a town of about 2,000 people, and I'm related to most of them. And it is not exactly a bastion of progressive thinking, though I do really love my hometown. And I spent a lot of time in high school getting bullied. They wrote slurs on my locker. I got pushed down the stairs a few times. And the administration mostly ignored it because they didn't see any reason to correct behavior that they saw as correcting me. When I was 17, I saw an after-school special. Not really an after-school special. It was one of those trashy documentaries, right? Like about, it was a shock doc kind of thing about trans people. And I remember sitting there and realizing, oh my God, that's me. And that was a really pivotal moment. But I didn't come out to my family until I was in my 20s because I wasn't sure how they would react. And honestly, they've all taken things pretty well. Even my 94-year-old grandmother has taken all of that really well. I started transitioning at 28, at least my physical transition at 28. I've dealt a lot with realizing that there were a lot of times in my childhood when I knew I wasn't a girl, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have the words or the context, if that makes sense.
It does, and thank you for sharing that with us, by the way, because you're educating us, as well as anyone else that's listening to this, of course. But it is interesting to hear you didn't know what you were in your skin, but you didn't feel like that skin was what you were supposed to be in. That's what I'm hearing you say.
It was odd because, I knew I was socialized to be a woman, and I knew that's what I was supposed to be in the eyes of the people around me. But I never felt like I fit in. I felt like I didn't get a manual, if that makes sense. I felt like everybody else had this secret manual to girlhood and womanhood, and I didn't have it. And so I was always messing up somehow. And I hated it. It was awful. And I've become a lot more comfortable now expressing femininity now that I'm comfortable in my body, if you follow.
Yeah. And you know what's kind of interesting to me, especially as I read books from our Appalachian authors, it seems to me that a lot of female cisgendered women that are brought up in the mountains, they tend to hunt, they tend to shoot guns, they tend to do boy stuff. So that, to me, that's kind of the interesting thing for me, and maybe I am stereotyping to a certain degree, but it seems like whether or not you felt you fit in your skin, you might still be doing things that some folks might think as being a little on the masculine side, right?
My father, when he found out he was having what he thought was a girl, when he found out my mother was pregnant, his first reaction was to say, "Well, can I still take her hunting?" So,
of course, and he did. I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
So I read that in the book, and again, that's not unusual for a lot of my friends. I have a lot of buddies in West Virginia. All my girlfriends, they could hunt, kill, and dress. You know, that's what they're brought up doing. So again, I appreciate the candor in letting us know. Having gone through your transgender experience and still in a small part of Pennsylvania, it's smallish, not a large community. How has it been on the other side? Roses and lollipops and unicorns, or do you still face some challenges? How are things now in your life?
Things are good here for the most part. I love this little college town so much. We have a pretty good LGBTQ community here. Not huge, but we all know each other. My biggest struggle has been, now that I'm on the other side, so to speak, when I meet people who don't know that I'm trans and who see me just as another guy, is I didn't really anticipate signing up to be part of the good old boys club. And the things men say.
Oops. Oh, my God.
All you need is a pickup truck. And
Yeah, right. The things men say at the bar, just in the company of other men, when they think that they're just with somebody who's not going to challenge them. It's really...
Oh, my God. You've got another book.
Honestly, I've been working on some poems about that. But it's been wild, honestly, being just some of the things that people have said. And then when you do call them out, they or say something that they aren't expecting, they just you could have slapped them. Like, it's
right.
Yeah. So that's been a bit of a challenge.
That's what's very representational in this book, is the fact that you have an added perspective that I think shines through in this book. You mentioned earlier that you love your hometown, and that comes through in this book. Not only do you love and respect your hometown, you love and respect your raising. Even though there would be many who would have disdain for the country kind of life and the hunting. And I think it's interesting that you tell us that, in a bar, everyone considering you to be male, let's tell a dirty misogynistic joke, and then you get to call them out, because you've seen from both perspectives of how that hurts. I wanted to commend you on the fact that this is a very positive book, and I commend you on the fact that you really do respect your raising, and you do respect your hometown. That's something that you don't see a lot of in a place that will bully you or other you, and that's refreshing.
Well, thank you. I think it's really important because a lot of queer folks, and this is a totally valid way to do things, they do kind of cut their past and move on, and that's fine. But for me, reconciling with my raising and my upbringing and my family, and walking that line where I'm far enough away that I have my own life, but close enough that we still talk all the time. It's been a very careful line to walk, but I'm not a city kind of person, and I respect that a lot of people are, but I get claustrophobic. I get There's just too much going on in cities for me. So I kind of had to reconcile in a way.
Wow, you know what? That's interesting that you should say that. A lot of young gay people are typically told, it gets better, move out of this small town, go to the big city. Mm-hmm. And you are like, nah, that's not me. My small town's going to have to work for me. I'm not leaving my town. And I have to totally give you props for that, because that says a lot. And by the way, I know more than one or two instances when people left that small town to go to the big city to come out. It has not been a good experience. It's not their upbringing. It's not their upbringing.
No, it's you know, and I think the LGBTQ community, we carry so much generational trauma and personal trauma from the experiences that society puts us through, that I think, there's just a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And and it's admirable that you hang around to do it.
When you stay in our small communities, you make us better because you're teaching us about yourselves. I find it to be welcoming, but that's my nature, to welcome people.
That's right, which is one of the reasons why you should go to RedHawkPublications.com right now. Drop what you're doing, put us on pause, we won't mind, and pick up a copy of A Tangled Lineage by Jay Orlando. It really is, in my opinion, one of the most important books that we've published.
You listen to Jay and you realize he didn't know what was going on. He didn't understand himself, and that's why the books help. I do have a question in terms of, now that you've published your first book, how has been the reception of specifically friends, family? Have you found some new fans?
Reception. Okay. The best thing that's happened so far is I was at a reading in Johnstown, PA. I do every other month. I go to Johnstown with an open mic group that I help out with. I'm not like one of the people who runs it, but when one of them can't make it, I'm like the substitute. And every other month we're in Johnstown, and every other month we're in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and it's called Poeming Through the Dark. And I went and I read some poems there, and I had copies of my book with me. And a woman came up to me afterwards and was like, I'd like to buy your book. And I was like, great. Who should I make it out to? And she said, I'd like you to make it out to James. That's my son. He's transgender too. And I just about cried. It was just that moment where it was like, yes, it's getting to who needs it, you know? And that was a really just exceptional moment for me, because it was like, I'm getting through. I also had somebody from a coffee shop buy it and then come back later and tell me their favorite poem. That was a really sweet moment, because then I knew they weren't just buying it because they knew me. They bought it because they actually wanted to read it. But the most difficult part so far has been my grandma read it. She's 94, and she's currently in a rehabilitation facility because she broke her ankle, and so she has all the time in the world. And she read it, and she texted my father to text me to tell me to call her.
Yeah.
I haven't done that yet.
Oh, go visit Grandma.
I believe that conversation will probably go a lot better than your imagination.
You might have made a mistake on one of her
yesterday, but she was in therapy, so I'm going to try her again today.
You might have just messed up on one of her recipes. You never know.
The oldest person in my family married and all was my wife's 99-year-old grandmother, who used to sit, she's passed now, but she used to sit at her table in her house, and she would ask me questions. She would go like, Robert, I got to ask you something about these trans people. I want to understand. And my wife would go like, Grandma, we don't really, and I go like, no, wait a minute, she wants to understand. Sometimes you find that in people of that generation, that they're not like one of these people that goes like, nope, not going to do it, not going to talk about it. They want to know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
My grandmother has been, on one hand, extremely supportive of me. And I have a gay cousin, and we both, like, she's been very supportive of both of us. On the other hand, she still thinks that if you play a rock record backwards, you'll hear satanic messages. So, like, it's
Sometimes
kind
when
of
you play a rock
double-edged
record forward, you'll hear satanic messages.
She made a comment about my father recently that she hoped he wasn't out listening to that rock music. And I said, Grandma,
Oh, wow.
he's 60 and twice widowed. I think he's allowed to listen to rock music if he wants.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Out there listening to that devil's music.
If you don't mind, Jay, you probably have heard us tell you this before, but how your manuscript ended up with us. Our good friend Tim Peeler is good friends with Patrick Bizzarro, and Patrick Bizzarro introduced us to you. And it was through that I received your manuscript. And Patrick, who's, again, good friend of Redhawk, he mentioned your transitioning journey and your being in his class. He felt the book, the collection of poetry was getting to the point where it was getting ready to publish. I asked for a manuscript to look at, and the very first poem I read, of course, was Lineage. And I'm going to ask you to read that, by the way. But just to point out that when I read that, it was like being hit by a bowling ball in the tummy. It was very, very powerful. I usually use beta readers, so I gave it to one or two other poets that we use as beta readers. One of them, Hilda Downer, who's from Appalachia, App State, as a matter of fact. She read it, and she's like, if there's any way for you guys to do this book, you need to. This is a powerful voice. And Tony Robles, another poet living in the mountains, he was another one. He said, damn, that first poem. So you hit us with your best shot up front. And would you mind maybe reading that for our listeners?
Not at all. Let me just get to the right page here. Lineage. Somewhere a hunter takes aim, pulling back, then loosing the string of his bow, and arrow in flight, he shouts, Marco, into the trees. Somewhere a young girl tells his father, I'm a boy, while his mother cries over porcelain doll faces, white as her chemo-stretched skin, and his father doesn't say anything except to tell the child no. Somewhere the mountains wear skin and dive into cricks to chase the shadow of a heron. Somewhere God is a woman sitting rigid in a hickory pew, reciting psalms in a bored monotone, while the stained glass windows silently lecture predestined truths about death, sex, and taxes. Somewhere a grazing deer lifts its head to bleat polo, but too late, it is on the ground, air escaping its parted lips, dead, and the hunter is showing his child the bare, bloody heart, and the child is crying. Somewhere a mechanically minded father with sawdust under his fingernails and grease-stained jeans is taught by his father how to oil a gun, fix a motor, build a deck, but never how to stop drinking or how to cry when he needs to grieve his dead wife. Somewhere God is a mother and the mountains grow hooves. Somewhere a girl becomes a boy or always was. Somewhere the heart of the woods beats amid brambles and thorns, and I am holding a bow, and my father is holding a bow, shouting, Marco, Marco, over the body of a dead deer.
That's great work. Who are some of your poet heroes?
Oh boy,
because you've got a very interesting style in this book. There are poems with interesting placement of words, interesting stanza choices. Poems will go from left justified to center justified. I'm just wondering, is there anybody in particular that you followed a style, or is there, have you combined the styles of some of these? Because, we stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. So who are some of your favorites or that people that you like? I know in your acknowledgments, Ginsberg's in there.
Yes, and Andrea Gibson.
Right.
Who is just, they're the poet laureate of Colorado right now, and they were who got me into poetry. I read their book, The Madness Vase, when I was, probably 19, and that blew the doors off for me. I'm also a really big fan of Stacey Waite, who has a book called Butch Geography that was gifted to me by a professor of mine, and that was a really influential book for me. It has a lot of dialogue about gender in it as well. And then I would say historically, other than Ginsberg, a big influence on me is Frank O'Hara. I'm a big fan of the LGBTQ poets that have come before and that are still out there doing the work. So those are probably my big four.
Well, this is this book concerned subjects that are oftentimes complex, because gender itself is complex. And those of us who are older, those of us who are, cisgendered, we oftentimes have a hard time. I just noticed that when you were talking about the poet laureate of Colorado, you very easily used the they and them, whereas folks my age, we stumble over that stuff and we misidentify. Is the community kind of forgiving of old people like us?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where people sometimes, I personally, I can't speak for everybody, but I personally am pretty chill with older folks. I'm someone who, I consider myself an educator when it comes to LGBTQ issues. I know sometimes people get frustrated with older folks, and I guess my message would be, if somebody ever snaps like, those aren't my pronouns or something like that, it's not at you usually. It's because it's the 18th time today they've had to hear that. It's the straw that broke the camel's back more often than not. If somebody snaps at someone for messing up pronouns or for misgendering, it's usually not directed at just that person. It's that frustration of, I've gone through this so many times already this week, this month, this year, just get it right. And
Right.
I don't think that it's malicious most of the time. It's just one of those things where, especially early on in a person's transition, even just social transition can be such a monumental burden on the trans person, because everybody's coming to you saying, well, I'm doing my best. And you're saying, okay, but this is really hard for me too. It's not all about your struggle here.
Okay, that clears up some of that's sweet.
Well, and also, again, we really appreciate you sharing, because you are educating. Trust me, you really are. Not just us, but anyone out there who's listening. It's something that we all need to be attentive to, but we're all willing to learn. Most of us are.
There's I didn't mean to interrupt you, but there's a very famous horror writer, Poppy Z. Bright, is how the author presented when he was presenting as female, has since transitioned to male, Billy Martin, and he has been one of the leading people to help educate people like myself and my wife, and because we were Poppy Z. Bright fans for years. You familiar with the author, Jay? Poppy Z.
I am
Bright?
not.
Yeah, all the books that he's written still are under that name, but they were leading back in the early 80s, this idea of different gender identifications, non-gender identifications, all these things that were really alien to people back then. We're much more accepting of some of that stuff today because we're educated. So being an educator, Jay, you say you're an educator. I think that's the best thing to be in some ways. Oh, you got a second poem you want him to read?
So yeah, if you don't mind, we would love to hear a second poem.
Yeah.
How about The Forest Has No Gender?
I can do that one.
I love that poem.
The forest has no gender. It is divine, which is to say it contains divinity, but also is in a rich pastry, a chocolate eclair, or an expensive red wine, the kind you sip slowly, divine. Every piece of clothing I own feels like drag, as in cross-dressing, slipping into and out of pronouns smooth as snakeskin, as in something chained to the back of a rusted red pickup being scraped along a dusty country road, maybe a body, dead, or it will be by the end of the drive, or the long breath in through a filtered cigarette, every inhale a relief, a risk. After the old woman with no eyebrows asks if I'm in the wrong bathroom, I start carrying a knife in my left pants pocket, only pissing in places where the shift manager knows my name. But the forest is devoid of straight lines, twisting trees echoing my spine, curving streams like hands, tracing my body in the half-dark of not quite dawn. It doesn't have to pretend that it's not an ecosystem.
That's brilliant. That's just a great poem. And again, please visit redhawkpublications.com online to pick up a copy of A Tangled Lineage by Jay Orlando. We will appreciate it, and so will Jay. And you'll even get an education in the meantime.
If you don't mind me asking a little bit about Patrick, your former professor, how helpful and influential has he been in terms of supporting your work?
Oh, he's been honestly probably my biggest champion. Honestly, we lost touch a little bit after undergrad. I was in the middle of a bunch of moves and trying to find stable housing and getting married and all this. We got back in touch probably a year or so ago. We got back in touch, and I don't even remember how we got back in touch now that I'm thinking about it. But we just reconnected and we started getting coffee and just talking about poetry. And he has so many great stories and so many just amazing experiences that he's had. And his writing too is hugely influential on me. I've read his book that you guys published probably a dozen times. We get coffee probably twice a month. We get dinner with him and his wife. My wife and I do. He is a poetry champion. He keeps saying that one of these days he's really going to retire, but I don't know.
I hope not.
I have to tell you a funny story about that. I spoke with him the other day because he's on our short list for editors, and he told me, he's like, my wife is telling me I need to retire, but I don't know if that's going to happen. You know what? If this is what he's enjoying in retirement, I say he should do it. Sorry, Risa.
Yeah, we just got coffee the other day, and he told me a very similar story.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name. He's got one poem that just floors me every time, and it's got a line in it, a man never knows what he'll do if someone places a gun in his hands. I just think, is it Violence? Is that the name of the poem? I think it might be. Brilliant poem. It's in Fog at the Manassas Battlefield. So,
Again, available at redhawkpublications.com.
Well, I'll tell you what. He's a fan of ours. We are a fan of yours. And we want to thank you for your time today, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for showing up. If not in person, but on Zoom.
Yeah.
So, from the wilds of Pennsylvania. So thank you out there in podcast land for tuning in, whatever day or time of the day or night that you're here. I'm Robert Knipe. We're here with Jay Orlando. Say goodbye to the folks, Jay.
Well, it was wonderful to be on here. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. And I just want to throw out there for any Indiana, PA folks who might be listening, my official book launch is on June 18th at Spaghetti Benders, 5 to 8 p.m. So locals, people in the Pennsylvania area, think about coming up.
One last thing we really have to ask you to do is we always ask everybody to just repeat the name of our podcast. Can you say RedPubPod?
Redhawk Pod.
You're listening to RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. Thanks, everyone.
This is
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod. A podcast from Redhawk Publications. RedPubPod.
Redhawk Pod.